Leela and Shalabh. It's a real pleasure to have you with us today. Before I introduce formally, I'd like to set the stage for our conversation and share what our audience can expect to take away from today's discussion. Compliance, once seen as a back office paperwork, is now shaping the front lines of business, impacting cost, trust, and risk. And 2025 is the year it takes the center stage. With that in mind, I'm thrilled to welcome our keynote speakers Leela Landis and Shalabh Singhal to unpack what this shift means and share real-world insights on turning compliance into a strategic advantage. Leela Landis currently serves as Global Head of Compliance at Jazz Worldwide, where she directs their compliance programs across more than 70 countries, overseeing sanctions, denied party screening, export and import compliance, anti-bribery, and supply chain security. She is also a licensed customs broker, certified U.S. export compliance officer, and certified global sanctions specialist. With over 15 years in global trade commerce, Leela has successfully built and led compliance programs in industries like defense, manufacturing, oil and gas, logistics, and chemicals. She has partnered directly with US Customs on programs such as CTPAT, broker evaluation, ACE testing, and Section 321 changes. Leela also played a key role in shaping trade rules for USMCA and continues to shape the compliance community via advisory boards and professional networks. Welcome, Leela. Uh, Hello, Shalabh. Shalabh Singhal is a third-time tech entrepreneur and founder and CEO of Trademo, a global supply chain AI startup. At Trademo, he is building a single source of truth of global trade, helping compliance professionals, logistics providers, financial institutions, and regulators gain real-time visibility, automate compliance, and build more resilient supply chains. Before Trademo, Shalabh co-founded Ziploan, a fintech company that scaled to over $80 million in SME lending disbursements, and Credence, a digital marketing and CRM solutions firm. He began his career at Goldman Sachs in New York, where he built financial products for institutional clients. As a CFA charter holder and Stanford GSB seed alumnus, Shalabh brings deep expertise in finance, data, and technology, using this unique perspective to solve some of the most complex challenges in global trade today. Welcome, Shalabh.
Thanks.
And
Thanks. Yeah.
absolutely. Very quickly introducing myself, my name is Megha Shah. I'm part of the North America Enterprise Sales team in Trademo, working at the crossroads of artificial intelligence, data, and finance. Before Trademo, I have worked in roles driving growth in banks, logistics, and fintech industries, and have always been very passionate about uh, playing some meaningful role in the international trade, in the global commerce ecosystem. So welcome again, and I have the pleasure to moderate today's fireside chat. Um, Starting with why compliance is a top priority in 2025. We've seen compliance shift from being a back office checklist to a frontline issue that directly impacts logistics cost, risk, and customer trust. Let's start by exploring why 2025 is such a turning point. I'd like to start with you, Leela. Why has trade compliance become a frontline priority in 2025 versus it used to be a couple of years back? And what new expectations and are regulators placing on logistics companies, freight forwarders, and shipping companies? Would love to hear your thoughts.
Thank you, Mega. I think that really this is kind of it's almost like a replay of what we saw in 2017. So, with the first Trump administration, with the initial Section 301 and Section 232 investigations, when those initial tariffs came down in 2017, there was, kind of a collective freak out in the industry of, oh my God, what are we going to do with these tariffs? We weren't, we don't know how to deal with this, and so then trade compliance really came to the forefront, and you had a lot of trade compliance professionals who were suddenly getting time with their executive leadership where they hadn't really had that kind of attention passed on them before. And they were looking at strategic planning. They were involved with discussions with their sourcing and procurement departments. Are we changing sources? Are we, passing some of this on to our customers? Our suppliers absorbing this? And so there was a lot that went on, but then it just kind of became the new normal. When once the Section 301 tariffs were in place, there was some kind of back and forth with there's exceptions, the exceptions expire, the exceptions are renewed. But I think that kind of the industry calmed down a little bit. You had then COVID that happened that again kind of just upended the logistics and global trade world. And so then there was a lot that people were dealing with that. But then now with 2025, when President Trump came into office for his second term, we've immediately had so many actions on trade. There's so many that I've lost count there because it's just happening all the time. It's something where I rely on other sources to have a detailed timeline because it's so complex. And so I think it's again a time of upheaval where there's so much going on that trade compliance professionals are really being called to the front, to within their organizations to say what's going on, how is this going to impact us, and what are our options. And so it's this environment where trade compliance once again is being looked at as help us navigate through this crisis and this chaos.
Interesting. Thank you. Thank you for your inputs, Leela. I have a question for you, Shalabh. What recent industry changes or enforcement actions have made trade compliance automation a business critical priority today?
I would second what Leela mentioned. I think in the Trump administration, we all of us are seeing so many changes, and logistics, which is facilitating all of this global trade, shipments and trade. Uh, they have a reputation to hold. They not only have to manage compliances for their own, but a lot of times we have seen the end customers of logistics companies are looking at their logistics providers, maybe freight forwarders and VOCCs, for help in matters related to compliance. Right? So, strengthening of the overall trade compliance systems for logistics companies cannot be an afterthought. I think um, strengthening the system with more automation, more integrations in their other systems has become very important. I think the developments with respect to new export control laws or making the existing laws more stringent, where we have seen clearly authorities like BIS, OFAC, they have been very upfront about the lack of, I would say, readiness in the logistics companies with respect to compliance, and why they think this is a sector which needs to focus a lot more on compliance. The changing regulations with respect to exemption of de minimis shipments coming in from China and Hong Kong and US, which suddenly brings millions of shipments on a monthly basis into the purview of compliance. All of this is, I think, too complicated, and automation becomes a table stakes now for logistics.
Absolutely. Thanks. Thank you, Shalabh. And you know what? It's so ironic that throughout my career, I've always been on the growth and the business side representing, and always most often on the other side of risk and compliance. And today I'm moderating a fireside chat on compliance, which is so ironic. But thank you for your 2 cents, Shalabh. So Leela, from your experience, which roles inside a logistics organization needs to pay the closest attention to these changes, and why do you think so?
Well, obviously compliance, right? The compliance role within the organization is really the one that should be responsible for horizon scanning, for monitoring not just what is being implemented right now, but what is being discussed. That's what a good compliance department does, is they're looking at, what are we talking about in the news about regulatory changes that are being proposed, what's going through committee, in what's being proposed, what are the political discussions or potential ramifications of the different changes, right? So the de minimis changes that Shalabh mentioned, right? Those have been in the works for quite a while. And so there's been a lot of political discussions around whether de minimis was something that was something that should be ended or restricted for years now, right? And so then if you are a business that relies on de minimis, this is something you should have been watching really closely and knowing that it was likely that at some point it was going to be at least restricted, if not ended. And now we've seen that they're going to be ending the de minimis treatment, right? So compliance, certainly. Legal is another one. I think that it's a natural thing for the legal department to monitor potential changes to regulations that could impact the business. And really, legal and compliance should have very close relationships. Whether or not compliance is a part of legal in the organization, that should be one of the key functions that compliance collaborates with in the organization. But I think that it's really important for operations as well. So if we talk about like within a logistics company, then your ocean team within the logistics company should be monitoring what's going on for FMC. They should be monitoring of what's going on for SOLAS, what's going on for international maritime organizations. They should be looking at that. Your air freight team should be monitoring what's going on in the air freight industry and what changes TSA might be
Yeah,
making. And
yeah.
so then I think that it's important that cross-functionally that multiple departments are staying aware of what's going on and then talking to each other about what do we think is going to happen with these changes and how is that going to impact our organization and how do we mitigate that risk.
Absolutely. I like compliance it is, but something that you highlighted is it's most important right now that the cross-functional teams now start actively interacting and kind of taking immediate action with these evolving scenario and the new changes. So thank you.
No one function or department can really operate in a vacuum or in a silo, right? They've got to collaborate.
Absolutely. Thank you, Leela. So, Shalabh, from the technology and business side, how have the regulatory changes shifted the way logistics companies are thinking about investing in compliance systems? And are logistics companies actually ready to implement such systems at scale?
Yeah, so I think my I would say experience working with several logistics companies and being a solution provider to them, I can tell is that in last 6 months to last 1 year, what we have seen is there is much more awareness about having a very robust sanctions compliance, and at times a robust compliance system for things like good screening against dangerous goods, screening against export controls, and possible violations, misclassifications. And we have seen that logistics companies are looking at solutions which can uh, work with their current workflows. A lot of companies are still having this information on email. They come to us asking for solutions which can work with email triggered systems and integrate with TMS and so on.
Yeah,
But I think there is still a lot more work to be done when we think about the new import control system in EU, or about the de minimis requirements, um, which which is actually like has a very large high volume for very small shipments. So I think that will take a lot more preparedness. I don't think majorly what we have seen, especially in mid market logistics companies also, that they
yeah.
are not yet equipped for scale. So there's a lot of work to do, but I think at least for few things like sanctions, good screening, export controls, we have seen a lot more awareness.
Absolutely. I think the biggest thing is that the need, they have realized the need and speed at which now they need to start working in this direction. At
Yeah.
least once that starts, people will start taking action in that direction.
Yeah.
So thank you for your thoughts. So moving on to our next section, talking about sanction compliance from manual checks to smart automation.
Hmm.
Leela, how have sanction screening requirements evolved, particularly with ownership structures and sanctions evasion networks?
I think that historically, a lot of logistics companies have looked at sanctions and denied party screening as being a US export requirement. That's how they've had it framed in their minds is, oh, well, that's a US export requirement. And so then I'm going to screen on my US exports and then I'm good. And that is really not the case, right? So sanctions compliance is something that applies to the global transactions that a
Yeah.
logistics company is doing, especially when they have a US nexus. If they're US headquartered or they have any kind of US nexus, they have US, listed on the US stock exchange, then they have exposure to requirements for compliance with US sanctions extraterritorially. And they need to be looking at their global operations and making sure they're in compliance. But that's a mindset shift that I think is still happening for some companies.
Yeah.
And so then what we're seeing in enforcement actions is we're seeing where some companies have failed to implement proper sanction screening for their global offices, where they've, said, oh, okay, well, it's all right if my Australian office, ships something to Syria in violation of US sanctions. Well, it's not, right? That's still a violation. Or they're allowing, a German office to be able to ship something to Iran, and they're getting penalties for that. We're seeing that in OFAC enforcement cases. We're also seeing more OFAC enforcement cases related to acquisitions. There's still quite a bit of merger and acquisition activity going on within the logistics space. And so then with that comes then successor liability. When the parent company purchases another company, they can inherit sanctions violations that that company has not already disclosed or been penalized for. And we're seeing OFAC enforcement actions related to that. And so it's really critical that companies are doing their appropriate due diligence as they go through merger and acquisition activity, and that they're making sure that they have appropriate sanction screening, denied party screening procedures in place for their total global operations, and that they don't get stuck in this myopic view that, oh, well, it's only a US export requirement.
I,
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you on that. Shalabh, how can AI and automation replace the traditional manual or these Excel-based workflows that has been going on for years now?
yeah. So I think more than how AI and automation can replace these workflows, um, there are very obvious gaps that you can see in the manual workflows. A lot of logistics companies, and we work with logistics companies in over 35 plus countries now. We have seen that a lot of times compliance is not a established function, even in a mid-market size logistics company, and there will be few people within the sales team who are just looking at an OFAC list, and as Leela mentioned, they are looking at only from the US perspective. Um, if a Thailand logistics company is facilitating a shipment for Europe, they might not be concerned that much, right? But uh, still, the systems in the manual workflows were completely, I would say, insufficient. They were looking at a manual list only at the time of onboarding a customer, a new customer,
Yeah.
or a secondary party. Maybe they will not look at that particular list for next 1 year, and just OFAC list won't survive, won't suffice. You have to look at all the other lists from EU, from within the US, criminal
Mhm.
watch list. So sanctions is all encompassing, as Leela also mentioned. So so the only possible way where you can build a robust systems with proper audit trails, in case an inquiry comes where you're able to prove that your compliance systems actually work, is through automation. And given the way compliance is becoming mandatory even in low value shipments, and there is a more tightening around KYC, KYB norms. So this
Yeah.
should be integrated in every shipment, no matter you are working with that party for the first time or on a daily basis. And
Mm.
that is only possible through automation. What
Yeah.
AI is doing today in a typical sanction screening and denied party screening system is it's reducing the false positives load, right? Which otherwise also comes in other industries like finance and all, and making it much more manageable, keeping it much more accurate, so that all the heavy lifting is passed on to the systems and AI, and the nuance and the judgment can remain with the compliance team.
Absolutely. I was just actually going to delve into false positives. So thanks for highlighting that, Shalabh.
Yeah.
So Leela, false positives are a huge drain on compliance teams, and I'm sure you know it better than anyone else. So how do companies keep them from slowing down operations while still staying compliant?
I think that this part of it is goes into when you're setting up your screening program, right? So I think that a lot of times companies don't put enough time and resources into the setup of when you start the screening program, right? Where they just say, well, I've got this data and we're just going to run it through the software and then we're just, and that's it, right? But there's a lot that goes into it. There are actually some consulting services out there that do things like a prep for installing global trade management software, which I think is awesome because I think that there's really a good amount of prep work that you need to do of understanding where does your data reside, right? Well, that's one of the things is where do all of your data reside, making sure that you have the right scope. That's one of the things is do you have the right scope of the parties? One of the mistakes that I see people make is where they only screen customers. But that is not appropriate for a denied party screening. You have to be screening all of your business partners. It should be including customers. It should be including intermediate consignees, your exporters, your shippers. It should have the banks that are involved, the carriers that are involved, right? The
Yeah.
vessels, right? So it's much broader than just customers. But then also data cleanup. One of the things that I've seen is sometimes, customers don't realize until they're already sifting through results from denied party screening that they have non-English characters in their names and addresses that their denied party screening system cannot translate. And so then they're having to manually review each one of those. Or they have just bad data in there where somebody put in a fake address because they didn't have a real address, right? Things like that, or a wrong country code. I had this happen to me previously at another organization where I suddenly got a screening hit that there were 3 shipments going to Iran. And I'm like, what is going on? So I'm freaking out. Like somebody's already, got me in a violation because they've entered shipments to Iran. They put
Yeah.
in the wrong country code. The customer name and address, it was in Ireland. They just simply chose the wrong country code, right?
Oh,
But so bad data like that can really cause issues. And so that's what I think really is going to result in, having fewer false positives is doing that work up front to make sure that you've got good data, that you understand where your data is and how your data is being entered. And then on the other side is making sure that you're choosing a denied party screening program that's going to help you to minimize those false positives. And that is kind of a balance, right? Because you want to make sure that your screening tolerances are set, that you're going to catch things that are close, that you really need to review, that may be a match. But you also don't want to end up with so many false positives that you're overwhelmed and you can't get through all of the screenings. So it's a
yeah.
balance.
These are the real experience. Sorry, Shalabh, you wanted to add
Yeah,
something?
no, I think very good insights and very practical insights. And just want to add to what Leela mentioned, what we have seen in some successful deployments, that the initial onboarding is very important. I think the first 3 months, because when you are integrating with any software for denied party sanction screening, um, and every company's data might be different. Someone might be and they might be working with names of companies or working with different jurisdictions. So during the first 3 months, you need to set up your configuration rules properly. You need to define: are you how you're going to screen a company. Is it in combination of address or just the company name? How you're going to screen an individual? What is the right threshold that works for you? What are the like kind of lists that work for your screening? And are there any additional elements that you can choose to reduce your false positives? What are going to be the level 1, level 2 escalations? For example, something like anything going to Iran or identifying any such country should be an escalation immediately. So I think the um, overall onboarding exercise between the vendor as well as the logistics company, and the integration of the systems and how the actual real world data is in their case is very important to set up the system. And I think then we have seen uh, post 3 or 4 months, then I think these systems work very smoothly.
Yeah.
And now they are now thanks to LLMs and Gen AI, you can further reduce the false positives for the end customer, because there could be AI agents who can work on maybe level 3 cases, not the level 1, level 2 cases, but level 3 cases to further reduce the false positives.
I think the other thing
Absolutely.
is making smart use of whitelists. So in a previous organization, one of the things that kept coming up, for some reason, UK Royal Mail would keep coming up as a false positive, right? UK Royal Mail is definitely not sanctioned. And so then this was one where it's like, we're just going to whitelist this one because one, the likelihood that they're ever going to be sanctioned is extremely low.
Yeah.
And two, if they did get sanctioned, I would hear about it in the news. I would know it immediately because that would be a big news headline, right? So then that was one where you're safe doing that. But you also have to be careful. You don't want to whitelist companies that are really not appropriate to whitelist.
Yeah.
It's just a private company. I would not whitelist them, right? Unless it's maybe a subsidiary of your own company, right? So,
Yeah.
and I've done that before where my own subsidiaries I would whitelist because if they get sanctioned, I'll know for sure, right? And so then I'm okay with whitelisting them. But if it's just a private company that's a customer of yours, I would not whitelist them because they might get sanctioned and you wouldn't know because you whitelisted them, right? So you want to be judicious with how you use it, but I think that there are certainly cases where it makes sense to do certain companies as whitelisted, where you don't have to worry about screening them because they're either not going to be sanctioned or they're ones where if they were sanctioned, you would definitely know about it because it would come to you in other ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is where, your kind of experience comes into the play where, where you do not have an exact black and white answer, but at the same time you want to be watchful. So that's where your kind of experiences play. And absolutely love your emphasis on being watchful on the entire stakeholders you're interacting with or you're working with versus restricting it to customers. So thank you on that. Shalabh, what does a hybrid workflow look like in practice? Like combining automation with human oversight. So what's your take on that?
Yeah. So, as I said, like I think a lot of heavy lifting in today's time and age can be passed on to automation, APIs, and AI. We have seen successful deployments where we are able to extract data from emails. We are able to extract data from different kind of trade documents in real time, and that helps you actually screen, as Leela also mentioned, multiple parties, not just the your customer, but all the intermediary consignees, notify parties, carriers, and everyone vessels, right? And all of this data can be brought into a common system where everything is getting screened as per predefined rules. And today, AI allows you to kind of match these records and then further reduce false positives. I think what we have seen in last 3 years with the help of new LLMs and APIs, you can definitely reduce APIs. You can do adverse media screening in real time to find more information on any positive matches and reduce that. But I think there is still a human in the loop where for a different level of risk, you can put it into different buckets or different escalations mechanisms, and that that judgment will always remain important. And as we go forward, as there is a requirement to further strengthen the compliance systems, it will help that this hybrid kind of a workflow is easing the load for compliance professionals, and not making it unmanageable.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you, Shalabh, on that. I'll do a quick time check. We're slightly running late by a couple of minutes. I would just like to highlight that if possible, we'd like to keep last 5 minutes for audience questions from audience. So just wanted to kind of highlight that. And yes, moving on with misclassification, preventing hidden cost with AI and automation. Leela, what risks are logistics companies facing under the new NMFTA density-based rules and HS code misclassification from a compliance and operational standpoint?
Yes, well, I can speak to the harmonized tariff code classifications. I think with this, it's a difficult subject for customs brokers in the U.S. because we have the MOD Act, right? The Customs MOD Act of 93 or 94, and that really shifted the legal responsibility for classification to the importer. So the importer of record in the U.S. is the one who is supposed to have legal responsibility for determining the correct harmonized tariff code classification. In practice, a lot of times brokers do classifications for their clients, just depending on the size of the client, the size of the broker, the types of
Yeah.
products that they bring in. This happens quite a bit, but then legally, they don't really have that responsibility. And it can also be severely limited based on the service agreement or the terms and conditions that the broker uses. Typically, a broker's terms and conditions are going to disclaim liability for that information, and it's also going to limit their liability to say that their maximum liability is going to be something like $50 a shipment, which would not cover an importer if they have a wrong classification that results in thousands of dollars more in duties, right? So it's a difficult area where brokers want to be very customer service minded. They want to help the importer. They want to make sure that they're doing things correctly, but they also have to be really careful with what they do, how much guidance they give. Personally, for myself, when I advise a broker on how much classification to give, I always advise that brokers don't do classifications, don't actually provide classifications unless it's under a consulting agreement, and that they should really only be giving guidance to the importer and letting the importer make the final decision on what the classification is. That being said, right now we're in this environment where there's a lot more impetus on importers to stretch the rules, to try to move into a classification with a lower duty rate, because you've seen tariffs have gone up so much that there's pressure to change that classification and to try to get a lower duty rate. This is
Yeah.
a really bad idea. It's a really bad idea.
Yeah.
One of the things is that Customs has the ACE system, the automated commercial environment, and that has been in place for years now. And it is giving them an unprecedented level of access to data. They have so much historical data on importers, on what you've been importing and where you've been importing it from, that when you make a change to the classification or you make a change to the
Yeah.
country of origin, thinking that you're going to be able to get a lower duty rate, Customs will know. The system will flag that for review. You will end up with a CF-28 asking you to prove why that's correct. And then even if the change is correct, then it's going to be, well, that means that you were misclassifying it for all those years before when you were using the old classification, right? So this isn't something that can be done, again, in a silo where you just make a decision and say, I'm going to change my classification because I want a lower duty rate. It has to be done very measured in examining the risk, looking at what does that mean for my previous shipments? Am I going to be able to justify this new classification? And it should be done in conjunction with the broker where you're talking to them about that and where they're giving you guidance on whether or not they
Yeah.
agree that a change in classification is warranted for that product. And so misclassification is certainly something that is more of a risk right now with the high tariffs than it has been before. And it's a
Yeah.
difficult spot for brokers to be put in. I'll just add really quickly, the other thing is that the importers may or may not know, but there was a change to the regulations for customs brokers in 2019 I believe, no, 2021. In 2021, that then now requires brokers to report importers if they cease to do business with them because of issues with their compliance. And so then, an importer who is acting in bad faith and maybe the broker no longer does business with them, that broker is supposed to report you to CBP. So trying to misclassify on purpose is really just not a good idea.
It's tempting, but you have no idea of the kind of repercussions.
Yeah, the risks
Absolutely.
are just too high.
Yes, yes. Shalabh, how can AI and data-driven classification systems help logistics firms reduce misclassification risks and avoid costly disputes?
Yeah. So I think before I answer this, I will also would like to add few points of what historically we have seen. So I would say classification has been a difficult subject, especially uh, automating it with a good level of accuracy. And we have seen that traditional ML models have not been able to give more than 50% accuracy in HS classification. So while an importer exporter would be able to classify a product, but it's I think it was too much expecting a logistics company to kind of judge or identify across industries that whether it's a right classification for this particular product, right? Because they would not have those full-time manual classification experts at their end. Um,
Uh,
but at the same time, I think two things have happened in last 2 years. One, uh, the risk of misclassification are not just limited to importers exporters, but I think to some degree they have also been passed on to logistics companies, because when you are misclassifying a good and a logistics company is facilitating that shipment, there could be a not just violation of classification or let's say wrong duties and taxes prescribed to it, but there is a significant risk of violation of import controls, export controls, import export restrictions, prohibitions, and so on. Um, and the overall, I think, country of origin rules related to that particular HS code or product. And the other thing which has happened is that now we have these LLMs, which are essentially large language models, very strong in NLP, of course, who can understand the context of a product and which can be trained in a multi-agentic kind of a workflow to consider customs rulings, to consider GRI nodes, to consider different kind of chapter nodes, and come up with the right classification for a particular product description. Now, if you pair this up with like billions of transaction records, if you have access to, you can come up with a pretty accurate classification, which let's say an average classifier or a more than an average classifier would look at. And I think so. The point I was trying to make is that in last 2 years, the need has emerged, and now the capability also has emerged in parallel. And
yes,
now this is the time when actually a logistics company can put in a misclassification system with more than 75-80% accuracy to flag shipments which are clearly misclassified. And I think that's something which a logistics company must have, so that they can identify actors or customers who are trying to do this, because I think again their reputation is on the line with the authorities.
absolutely, Shalabh. Definitely understand that misclassification is the most burning issue, and it you just got to be super, super, super careful before falling in the trap. Um, Thank you. So moving on to our next section with regards to good screening and real-time visibility. Leela, how has good screening expanded beyond just dangerous goods into dual use items, ESG bans, CHPL, and import export controls?
I think that commodity screening is really an area that is ripe for a lot more rigidity or structure within logistics companies in particular. A lot of times the traditional attitude has been that well, you pay me to move stuff. It's your responsibility as the shipper to tell me what it is and if there are any restrictions, and then I just move it for you, right? I move it from point A to point B. But more and more, there is an expectation from regulatory authorities that the logistics company is a full-fledged actor in the supply chain and also has responsibility to understand what are the goods that they're moving and what restrictions may be on them. And we're seeing this happen with government agencies. Also seeing this happen with carriers, especially carriers that are partially or fully government owned, where they are flowing down those requirements to the freight forwarders that work with them to say, you have to have commodity screening in place because I don't want you to offer a shipment to me that has restricted commodities that I don't want to move, right? Or that, is trying to move to a party or a destination that I don't want to support, right? And so there's a lot with that. But then how do you properly do commodity screening when you're moving thousands of shipments a day or millions of shipments a day, right? That's difficult, especially if you're not getting good data from the shipper. So that looks at, again, going back to what kind of data are you getting? What format is it in? How detailed is it? This has been a really big concern on the e-commerce side, where a lot of e-commerce shippers were giving very vague, general, or just completely incorrect descriptions for their merchandise. And this is something that CBP cracked down on with requiring, with having an automated note in an automated error in ACE that would reject overly vague merchandise descriptions. But I've seen things where they're calling just something clothing, just the word clothing, right? That's not going to fly. Calling something daily necessities or household goods, right? Those are not proper descriptions. But then, for the logistics company, if that's the description that you're getting, you have no idea then what's really in that, right? And so then that's a big concern. So I think commodity screening is something that logistics companies need to put more work into, as far as what are you doing to mandate that you're getting good descriptions from your shippers so that you understand what are the actual goods that you're moving. What are the restricted commodities that you want to be screening for? What are the different classes of goods that you want to be kind of red flags for review? And then how are you going to flag those and escalate those and then make a decision? So there's a lot of work, I think, still to be done on that.
Absolutely. Shalabh, how can companies integrate good screening into TMS, WMS, CRM systems without acting friction or silos?
Yeah. So I think screening in general should be kind of an invisible layer now, where um, whether it's a TMS system or it's a CRM, or like, let's say a warehouse management system, as you
Yeah.
mentioned. So at the time of a new transaction creation, at the time of booking of a new cargo, any inbound shipment for a warehouse, there should be automatic screening which should happen uh, pertaining to that particular product description. Uh, Depending on the mode of transportation, is it a dangerous good? It is a dual use good. Depending on the country of export and import, are there any export control, import control restrictions? You're checking for the misclassification. AI also now allows you to check whether this particular product description is vague, right, in real time, because it can clearly see that this particular product cannot be classified into any category. The information provided is too ambiguous, right?
Yeah.
So um, and I think with all these integrations into the TMS, there should be a central log somewhere which allows someone to see the risk and flag those shipments. This is, I think, pretty much possible. A lot of successful cases where we have seen that such deployments can minimize any kind of friction. And you are not specifically asking for someone to screen. That will automatically happen as soon as a transaction gets created. So I think that is the ideal flow we have seen.
Perfect. So, thank you on that note. Now we are at about the last section for today's discussion, and then we'll spend some time on addressing the questions by the audience. Uh, Talking about aligning ops, legal, and tech. Shalabh, if a logistics firm wants to start small with automation, where's the smartest place to begin with?
Same things, I would say. I think sanction screening, denied party screening is
Yeah.
the minimal. I think the next step would be good screening, especially for dangerous goods or dual use good, uh, uh, maybe misclassification. And then it's about basically how you're extracting information from the documents, right? Are you just looking at some limited information which you have in your system, or can you look at all the documents which are coming your way? Are you able to digitize them and compare the information across the documents? Also run screening checks on the top of those documents. So I think these are the few things that we need to start with. I think the compliances are just increasing. So, but this is table stakes.
Thank you. Thank you, Shalabh. Leela, what advice would you give leaders about cross-functional collaboration between compliance, operations, and IT? I know we briefly spoke about collaboration, but maybe something more if you would like to add.
Yeah, I think that compliance departments really work best within an organization when they take it from an approach of wanting to help the business. That compliance is there to help the organization, to facilitate business, and to help the organization succeed by protecting the organization. Sometimes that means you're protecting the organization from itself, from protecting it from making bad decisions, but really coming from a place of helpfulness. And so then, treating those other functions as partners and not adversaries, right? Of what can we do together to mitigate risk, to facilitate business, to protect the organization as we continue to try to achieve our operational goals, right? Looking at it that way. I think the other thing I would suggest is having some type of structure with your communication, that it shouldn't just be, compliance is going to reach out to operations when there's a problem, and then we'll talk about what the problem is and how we're going to solve it. But there should be some type of regular communications that they have, whether that is a one-on-one meeting between a compliance person and one of the operations executives where you guys meet on a regular basis and talk, or maybe a bigger meeting where you meet with the heads of different functions and give them updates on compliance. It could be some type of regular compliance call that you invite a lot of people to, where you give updates on compliance for the organization, or an email or a newsletter, right? Depending on how does
Yeah.
your organization communicate, what's normal for your organizational culture. But I feel like if people are hearing from compliance on a regular basis, you're talking to them about what you're doing, what's going on, and you're seeking their input, then you're much more likely to have a strong relationship that helps you to solve those problems better and faster.
Yeah, I love your emphasis on being proactive versus being reactive. Thank you on that. In fact, that brings me to a question. Actually, I'm opening this question to both of you. How do you overcome change resistance when compliance shifts from manual to automated systems? There is always going to be resistance. So some 2 cents from both of you on that as a
Yeah.
closing remark. Yeah.
Uh, I can go first. Um, So I think the resistance is because uh, the compliance professionals and companies who have, let's say, otherwise robust compliance processes, but it is manual. They have seen that uh, there might be a lot of false positives, there might be false negatives, right? Uh, so I think doing pilots for automating of the system, engaging the compliance team from day one into the workflow, how they should be defined, and then what we discussed that even after the initial onboarding, refining the rules based on the this particular company's specific data, specific jurisdictions, kind of risk that they deal in. I think that is very important because I think somewhere compliance teams understand that uh, not going for automation altogether is not scalable, and that's not going to make them efficient. But at the same time, I think in the short term, when someone sees that, okay, this system is not helping me, it's generating me a lot of false positives, there are some false negatives, then I would rather hire few more people in my team and make ensure that the process remains stagnant, more I would say reliable. But I think they know that in the long term, in the midterm, that's not a very stable solution. So we have seen that pilots work very well, involving compliance team, the actual users of such solutions for whom you are automating this stuff, understanding their workflows. That is very important.
Absolutely. Thank you, Shalabh and Leela.
I would just add, so I feel like change management is one of the most important soft skills that a compliance person can have. And so
Yeah.
then if you can take a change management course, if you can get some formal training on change management, I think it pays dividends as a compliance person because it's a really important skill. But really, I take it back to basics and with them, what's in it for me, right? So you think about you're trying to sell someone on why you want to make a process change. You need to think about the motivation. What benefit is it going to provide to them for you to make this change? And so you think about, is this going to reduce the time that they have to spend on a task that's kind of administrative, right? And free up more time for them to work on things that are more strategic or process oriented, or doing training or things like that. You think about, are they concerned that AI is going to take my job, and right that
Yeah.
we're gonna have AI eliminate jobs. And I think that that's a common concern right now in the discussion of what role AI can or should play in trade compliance is a really important topic. But I think it's really important to know that AI is certainly not at a point where they can replace a trade compliance professional. It
Yeah.
just can't, right? But what it can
Absolutely.
do is it can take over some routine and administrative tasks that then frees up resource time for trade compliance professionals to do things that we need them to be able to do, that we need humans to be able to do, like
Yeah.
horizon scanning, like strategic thinking, like, paying attention to what's going on with the organization and planning a trade compliance strategy around that. Those are things that you want your team focused on. You don't want them focused on, I'm spending all day sifting through
Yeah.
300
Yeah.
false positives, right? And so I think that's part of what has to be what's communicated is we're not doing this to replace people. We're doing this to reduce the workload on our existing people so that you can do higher level tasks.
Absolutely. I totally love your closing remark on emphasizing that AI is here not to replace you, but support you, help you, and enhance the way in which you are delivering. So thank you on that. And if you don't mind, can we just quickly go through some of the questions from the audience?
Sure, sure.
There's a question. We are a mid-size freight forwarder. How do we decide whether to build compliance tools in-house or use an external solution?
Uh, Leela, you want to take this, or I can?
Yeah, and so I would say that it's rare that building it in-house is the better option, right? Sometimes I think companies feel like it's going to be cheaper to do it themselves in-house, and that's why they want to do it. But
Yeah.
if you really look at the actual time that it will take you to build something in-house from scratch, it's probably not cheaper when you look at all of the labor that you would have to do to build it yourself in-house. I think generally it's better to go with a tool that's already been created that'll work with your system and that'll work with multiple systems. A mid-sized freight forwarder is still probably going to be doing acquisitions. You're going to bring on companies that aren't already on the same system as you. You need a
Mhm.
solution that's scalable and that is going to be able to be adaptable. And if you're trying to build something yourself in-house, you're going to be running through these budget problems every time you need to go and make changes. You're going to be running through resource problems, right? Because initially the team that you have that builds it, they may not be there in 5 years when you need to go and make changes, and you no longer have the developers who really understood how it was built and how it works, right? So I don't recommend trying to build it yourself in-house. I definitely recommend looking with an external solution that was designed for that. But I recommend doing your homework and really making sure that you look at several different options to select what's going to be the right solution for you.
Absolutely. Nothing like letting experts do what they're good at and focus on what we're good at. Sorry, Shalabh, you were saying something.
Yeah, I mean, basically the reason why compliance systems are different, and they're not just like a typical web application that you can develop in house rather than outsourcing to a dev shop, is in compliance you're talking about monitoring hundreds of sanctions globally as they are changing on a daily basis. You are talking about monitoring tariffs. You're talking about monitoring over a million export import controls across whatever, like 150, 190 countries, and all the new regulations that are coming up, looking at the tariffs, duties, landed cost, and so on. So that requires a very different kind of investment and skill set. And I think just investing into a tool will be 100 times cheaper than trying to build this in house. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you on that. And how do companies keep up with constantly changing regulations across multiple jurisdictions without overwhelming their teams? And you know this is the problem of the hour. So
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's part of what we talked about of using automation to reduce the administrative routine tasks is because then you want to free up your compliance team to do that, right? Because you need is you need your people to be reading about what's going on, to be reading the Federal Register, to be reading, trade compliance blogs, to be monitoring newsletters, to be attending webinars, right? Getting education. They need time to be able to do that. And there's really no substitute for having trade compliance professionals who have the time to go and stay well educated on what's going on in the industry.
Yeah.
absolutely. Thank you. And one more question, I think we can take one last question. What KPIs or metrics should compliance leaders track to prove the value of automation to their executives?
Um, so I can add a few points. I think typically they will look at uh, have uh, like, are you able to process more shipments in the same amount of time? Can we see reduction in, let's say, any kind of audit request coming in with some wrong considerations? And is the existing team able to manage much higher workload, maybe percentage decrease in false positives? So some of these KPIs, I think, talking more from the logistics perspective.
I would say on KPIs, for me, I think what I see a lot of teams do initially when they start reporting on KPIs is they just report tasks, volume, and that doesn't really do anything for them, right? You tell me that I screened 1,000 parties this month. So what, right? Like, as an executive, I'm like, so what, right? What difference does that make? What does that tell us? What are you going to do differently based on that metric that you tracked? And if the answer is nothing, then that's not a good metric for you to be tracking, right? And so I think that really with KPIs, that your compliance leader needs to be sitting and taking a really critical look and saying, if I'm tracking this, what information does this give me in terms of what action I would take and how I would do things differently if this number goes up or goes down or something like that, right? And if it does not lend itself to making any kind of decision or any change in behavior, it's not a worthwhile metric for you to track. So I think it's really important to be very thoughtful about what metrics are actually important to track for compliance. Why would you want to track them? Who would you be communicating to? And who's going to care about what that metric means?
Absolutely. And with that, we come to an end of our chat today. Thank you both for sharing your invaluable insights on compliance, which is more critical today than ever. And I'm sure our audiences completely appreciate your expertise with that. And we close today's session. So thank you once again.
Thanks,
Thank you
Vika.
so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, same here, Leela. Thank you.
Thank you.